I'm very, very honored to be talking today with someone who countless practitioners of Arab music look to as their North Star in many ways. A big portion of oud players around the world emulate Simon Shaheen's style and ornamentation language and technique and I have to mention I can go all hour just introducing Simon Shaheen, but I can he not only is he also a virtuoso in oud and violin, and he's a composer and he's an educator, but there are a few important things. He also continues to extensively share his knowledge of the tradition with musicians and students around the world, including his founding of the Arab Music Retreat 24 years ago, and his work with Berkeley and other institutions. So again, I can go on, but it's truly wonderful to be with you today, Ustaz Simon.
Yeah, hello. Thanks, Wanees, for this beautiful introduction. And I don't know if I deserve it, but and I would like to thank also Brian and Gabby for putting this together and reinvent again our connection, me and the World Music Institute, which goes back to the beginning of the 80s when I was introduced to the world, the music from around the world in New York by the World Music Institute and its founder, director Robert Browning at that time. And the World Music Institute played a big role in introducing music from around the world to America. Meaning that the World Music Institute was the window from which so many artists and performers, singers, dancers, you name it, came to perform in New York for the World Music Institute. And then through the World Music Institute, they made it into the performing arts centers all around the United States. And this enriched the music scene in the United States. This was like one of the greatest attempts for Americans to be introduced to music from around the world, from the Far East, from the Middle East, from East Europe, from South America, from Africa, and all the other parts I forgot to mention. So the World Music Institute is an important institution in cementing the music globally in America, introduce it to the American people, and to become a part of their social and artistic fabric in the way they look at music and perceive music.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you something. This is kind of on my mind. You started playing music at a very early age, and from a previous conversation we had a few days ago, I asked you about this too, and you mentioned that the violin and the oud were kind of like your right and left hand from the very beginning. But also, you were raised in a family, a very musical family. Your late father, Hikmat Shaheen, was a renowned composer, oud player, and vocalist too. And then from there you moved on to study classical violin in Haifa. And after that you came to New York and continued your studies and stayed here. And my question about this is, these are extremely different musical environments. What was that like for you? So what were the most striking of these different musical environments and experiences? And I'm very curious about New York specifically too.
When I started to teach at Berklee College of Music, 2011, they asked me to say a few words, and I said, let's bring down the walls and let music seep and different styles seep into each other. And in the final look at music, it is music, whether it is Western classical or Arabic traditional or any parts of Africa, it's music. Uh, and this was the environment. This was the philosophy in which I uh, grew up. My father introduced me to the best of Arab traditional music, of course. At the same time, he introduced me to Western classical music. And therefore, when I was at the age of 4 and a half, he made sure that I go to the Conservatory of Music in Haifa. At that time, I studied with a teacher, a Russian violin teacher. And this was the beginning of a long journey. So I picked up the oud because of my father. He was a oud player. So he introduced me to the oud, and he made a small oud for me to play on, which is now at the museum, the Art Museum in Detroit. And then introduced me to Western classical music violin. Also, I was influenced by my cousin, George Shaheen, who also played the violin, and he encouraged me to pick up the instrument and play. And you notice that I have the natural for it. So I started the conservatory violin. So oud and violin, they went hand in hand, and I don't remember playing concerts without both instruments. It happened only one time at the Lute Festival in Australia when I had to travel only with the oud. And this was the most horrible traveling because every minute I had this feeling of, where's the violin? I forgot the violin. And I was carrying only the oud.
Yeah.
So always I played the oud and the violin in concerts.
So I'm going to touch back on this idea of, letting the music seep into each other a little more. Again, this is another question that I struggle with. So naturally, I'm curious about what your take on it. So you were exposed to many different traditions, being in many different, having kind of experienced many different places in music, and throughout your career. You have a duet record with a Hindustani musician, Vishwa Bhatt, who plays a slide guitar that kind of acts as a veena in a way.
Yes.
And you have other projects, many collaborations, including kind of the one milestone project that leverages intersections of many musical traditions, which is Blue Flame. So for those of you who are listening, if you haven't heard Blue Flame, it's you have to listen to Blue Flame. So when exploring these intersections and kind of putting together all of these different traditions in one kind of cohesive project, do you feel that this is kind of a part of an effort to expand Middle Eastern music or to innovate on Middle Eastern music, or do you feel like this is more kind of a result of your bimusicality?
Uh-huh. I won't use the word expand because it's natural, meaning that when I play and compose and perform the Arab traditional music, it is Arab traditional music at its best. And my repertoire is huge. I put so much time into performances, education, having all these residencies on traditional Arab music, and I travel all around the world, universities, performing arts centers, museums, conservatories. At the same time, growing, as I said, with also classical music, Western classical music. And I don't know if this is correct to say Western classical music. In my teaching at Berkeley, I say music from Germany, music from England, but putting all these traditions or styles in one baggage is very dangerous. And the same thing I do with the Arab traditional music. We can use it for today, but I say traditional music of Egypt, traditional music of Syria, it is important to be particular and specific. So when I came to New York, I came with the, as I said, the Arab traditional music. I came with Western classical music, and I was, I mean, I had a talent and for performing both the violin and the oud. And therefore, in New York, I met so many musicians from around the world. Okay, and this is how this concept of the to the incorporation and the fusion, if you will, with so many musicians from around the world started. I met many American jazz musicians and European jazz musicians. And I went at the same time, I was going to Manhattan School of Music for my classical music. I went to Columbia University for my graduate studies, music education. And at the same time, I looked around me and I noticed that there was no representation to Arab music, to Arab traditional music. And this is when I started connecting with the performing arts centers in the United States. And the first was the World Music Institute in New York.
Mm.
And connecting to universities and doing workshops, creating the Near Eastern Music Ensemble, which was an ensemble that included 6 musicians that came from Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, great performers. But their venues were like performing in weddings, performing in the nightclubs. The nightclub scene was the scene that represented Arab music. And I convinced those musicians to alter their thinking from the nightclub to the stage. And therefore, I had to get them a lot of performances, of course. I remember we used to do 90, 100 performances a year, just Arab traditional music. And therefore, we sustained the ensemble. And in 1996, 97, I started the Cantara music ensemble, which was a number of musicians from various traditions. Like we had also saxophone players, we have guitar player, we had 2 percussionists, we had a flute player, and me on the oud and the violin, bass. So the bass player was from France. The saxophone player was from America. The flute was from Lebanon. The percussionist, America, South America. So it was a great way to meet and start to compose what you call this collaboration, if you want, collaboration of different styles where they meet organically and they feed into each other in the most beautiful musical fashion. This is the point that I want to make here, that when you have various styles, fusing together, I hear many attempts on fusing music, but if we don't know the styles, if you don't know how to fuse the styles together and find the commonalities that brings those sounds together, then it's a dangerous attempt. But when it works, it's the most beautiful thing. So on one side, I have the Arab traditional music. On the other side, I have what you call the open contemporary fusion styles that started with Cantara and recording of Blue Flame.
Thank you. Should we take a quick break and play some music so that we can also talk about the instrument a little bit?
You want me to play?
Please, I would love that.
Yeah. I had the oud with me. I don't have the violin because I came from New York to spend a few weeks in California. But I have the oud. I can play on the oud. Is that okay with you, Wanees?
That's of course more than okay with me.
Let us see if yeah.
Allah, Allah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I want to ask you, so for the benefit of those who are not familiar with the instrument, can you tell us more about the oud and kind of its maybe a little bit about its construction?
Yeah, the oud is those who know the lute, they will know the oud. It's the forerunner of the lute. And as you see, this is the top of the instrument with the open fingerboard, no frets, and therefore we can play microtonal music. And we see the beautiful rosettes in the middle, the three of them, one large and two small. It has five double strings, it's double chord strings, and one bass. Of course, this is the back of the wood, kind of semi-pear shape. And I see here the pegs for tuning the instrument. I use also the pick, which is made of horn, animal horn, to strum the strings. Okay, and this is why the reason we have the double strings is to give it more projection and warmth to the sound. Okay, so this in a nutshell, this is the oud. And the oud is, as you know, Wanees, it's the central instrument in the takht or the Arab traditional ensemble. It's used by composers to compose. It's used by singers to accompany themselves. The way in the United States, for example, guitar players, singers who play the guitar accompany themselves, or piano, whatever. And of course, the oud was in the last, I would say, 35, 40 years, improved a lot. It moved from its role as an instrument behind the singer to accompany singers to the front stage. So it became a solo instrument, meaning that I can go today, I do a lot of concerts where it's with the symphony orchestra or where Arab traditional orchestra or fusion projects where we play several instruments. I use the oud, and the oud is a leading instrument in this case. Or I can do recitals where I perform for an hour or 1 hour and a half, just a oud program on the stage. So the role of the oud improved immensely, and it became a very powerful instrument. And therefore, you see a lot of American musicians, Canadian, South American, Europe, forget about it. Musicians who want to play on the oud, and they infatuated with this instrument. Not for no reason, there is a big reason for it.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I want to take us back a little bit to the previous conversation that we're having. When you arrived here in the United States, you mentioned that a lot of the Arab music was almost exclusively in the nightclub scene, in weddings, social events, almost exclusively consumed by the Arab community.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a profound impact in bringing the Arab music to the main stages, festivals, and concert halls. Now, with that, it feels like you kind of created a canon of repertoire, a collection of repertoire that is performed in these settings. That is a little different from, much different from the repertoire that was performed in the weddings and in the clubs and in these social events. This is almost, you know, this is very evident in the one of the records that you put out in the 90s called Turath, which is a standard setting record in many ways. So my question is, uh, how did you decide that this would be the repertoire? It's mostly instrumental too. So how did you make these decisions, and why did you pick the specific music for these types of settings?
Uh, I start by saying that uh, there are different genres of the same repertoire, okay, or the same music from an area or a country or a region. Then, therefore, you have folk music, and the purpose of the folk music is to cater for the folk aspect of the repertoire. Uh, and you have the city music. City music, it's expressed via the clubs and the social gathering. Uh, then also you have the pure traditional music, which some people call classical Arabic music. And this type of repertoire, also vocal and instrumental, is suitable for a chamber environment or the stage, a stage at performing arts centers, if you will. So, in order to reach out to audiences, I'm talking here about the American audience at large, not just specifically the Arab community. I'm talking about the Arab community, the American community at large. Then we have to come up with fantastic musicians who are virtuosos on their instruments and who understand the repertoire, the traditional Arab repertoire. And then put together, selections. Repertoire is huge. I mean, if I just want to think, if I say that I know, let's say, 4,000 or 5,000 traditional songs, and I don't know, 500 pieces of music, this is beside the improvisation or repertoire. So I'm not exaggerating. So this is a huge repertoire. So in order to reach out and perform on the stages at the performing arts centers, it is about the music that is serious, that is deep, that it reflects, has reflection, and that expresses virtuosity and musicality at the same time. Playing, like popular music with big sound, with the big percussions and darbuka and the stuff on the stage is not going to mean much. Okay, we want to hear the sonorities on the instruments. We want to hear the improvisational skills of the musicians, and want to hear an ensemble playing at its best. And therefore, I decided that this was the way to go, is to go to the performing arts centers, play traditional music at its best. And as I said, we have a huge repertoire. It was a decision of what selection I would put together in order to serve an idea. Okay. For example, I did a tour. I don't know if I memory what 2012, maybe 13. The music of the film music in Egypt, right? And we performed segments from music that was composed by Muhammad Abdul Wahab, Muhammad Fawzi, Farid al-Atrash, Wadi al-Safi, Fairuz, and Rahbani, of course. So this was a project. And for that project, you select from that repertoire music, Arab music, in the films, which is so beautiful and fantastic. And the audience connected very much because we showed on the screen some of the scenes from the film where the singers are performing what we perform live. So we start with the screen, right? The singer is singer like Muhammad Abdul Wahab, and then you see the singer on the stage with us, with the Near Eastern Music Ensemble, performing the same song live. So this was the project. So I was thinking always in terms of the project, what to put together a segment of instrumental and vocal pieces of music that serves that project.
Thank you. I'm going to continue on that theme for a couple more minutes, but I want to also remind everybody that you can go to the Q&A and drop your questions in there for us. Continuing on this same topic, I experienced this firsthand, seeing your concerts and also performing with you. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you about it. So traditional Arab music is, it has a lot of improvisational elements. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of ornamentation. We improvise. Every night the music will sound different based on the audience. So there's a lot of energy going back and forth between the audience and the musician in a traditional setting. So the music itself is best consumed in kind of this intimate way. And you seem to be able to kind of mimic that intimate environment in much larger settings. And I noticed that one of the experiences was very striking for me, because you break the fourth wall of the stage and you start talking to the audience, which many people do, but you also expect them to respond to you, which was the surprising part of experiencing this. So you immediately create a conversation back and forth on stage, and somehow that kind of breaks a barrier, and now it feels like the audience is inside of the experience rather than outside and watching. Can you elaborate more on that approach?
This is a very good point, Wanees. And I hate anything that's called rigid. I look at many performances that are great, but they are rigid. Performing, go on the chair, on the stage, and this could be also the theme of Western classical music. It's so rigid. When I did my concerto for oud with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, I mean, this is one of the greatest symphony orchestras in the world. Okay. And, through the rehearsals, I try to tell the musicians in one way or another, let's loosen up a little bit. And I wanted them, there was one page from the first movement where the violinist, cellist, violist, they didn't see any bowing or fingering. And they say, oh, you forgot to put the bowing. I said, no, it is intentional. I want you to use your own bowing the way you feel it. There is no fingering on the left hand. No, please use your fingering the way you feel it, right?
Yeah.
And dynamics, no dynamics. What you ever hear or feel, please express it. This was great event to make them feel that they don't have to be that rigid, to use their creativity, because they know how to use the bow, they know the fingering in the left hand. And it is so beautiful to see them doing this when they are not allowed, right? Or it's not the tradition or the practice. And I remember when I went up to the stage in Detroit, right away I talked to the audience. I mean, we had like 2,500, 2,600 people there in the music hall. I spoke to the people, and right away I made the connection to them by explaining why I did this concerto, why it's for oud. How come the oud is one of the first attempts to play with the symphony orchestra. And I explained how I compose it, just in 2-3 minutes. You cannot just elaborate too much. And this was a mean to connect to the audience and give them some tips of how to listen to the piece. Okay, so there's an educational element there. And I noticed that whenever I connect to the people, I talk to them. Of course, there would be their kind of a little laugh, a little joke here and there. But the voice, the explanations, the contact with the audience, and I expect them to respond. Maybe one of the audiences there will ask a question. Yes, I expect that, and in many instances it happens. So that's very important. It brings life, and it breaks this rigidness between the performers, the orchestra, and the audience, and we become that evening like a family. I always tell the audience, tonight, this is my house and you are my family. so
Right.
so let's enjoy the performance together. And 25,000 people, they become kind of five people listening to you in your own living room. So this is definitely a good feel.
That makes sense. And yeah, as I said, this was one of an interesting experience for me to see. Um, so another kind of thing that I'm thinking, and this is, I'm just kind of going away from the performance aspect of this. You founded the Arab Music Retreat um, almost 25 years ago.
Hmm.
So this has been going on for a long time. And again, when you arrived here, not much Arab music was taking place on the academic level. So you had a monumental impact in institutionalizing, Arab music in education and preserving the music. And not only with the music retreat, but other organizations such as Berkeley now. Um, but the Arab Music Retreat specifically had a huge impact on musicians from around the world, not only in the U.S., because there are a lot of people who come from different parts of the world to be here as part of the music retreat. So can you briefly tell us a little bit about the music retreat and how is it different from what you do at Berkeley?
At Berkeley, if I give a course, it is for a semester, 3.5 months, 14 weeks. So we have the time factor, right? And the same course happens, let's say, each semester, every semester. So many students, they have the chance to register to a course and participate. And as I said, it's long experience. The retreat is about 7 days. So we don't have this luxury of 3.5 months or a year or 2 years, like in Berkeley, academically speaking. So the retreat started in 1997. And the idea of the retreat is to, uh, as I said before, I always accompany, I did performances at the performing arts centers, but always those performances were accompanied by workshops, master classes, community events, even going to the hospitals and do bedside performances to people in hospitals. So it was more community thing, okay? Going to perform in a music hall and leave, go back to your home, it doesn't, I don't think it will have that much influence. But doing all these things together as one package, it definitely reaches the community and it speaks to a community. So doing this for so many years, I was thinking, why not to bring all this experience to one place? It doesn't mean I stop to travel and do universities and colleges and performing arts centers, but we can do this experience in a very concentrated way, 7 days of learning Arab music, performance, theory, ear training, ensemble playing, and the very intense atmosphere where people come to participate. And who are the people who come there? We have ethnomusicologists, we have composers, people from symphony orchestras, jazz musicians, rock and roll. We have, regular musicians, who perform beautifully on their instruments, but not necessarily that they know how to read music, or it's not necessary. And, they gather there and they go through this week-long experience. Uh, I noticed after, 24 years or 25 years, whatever it is, I noticed that now we have the retreat community in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, Middle East, of course. Uh, and this community means that they leave the retreat, they go back to their environment, and they apply what they learned at the retreat in their own specific specialty. Composers use this music in their compositions. Music educators, they do it in schools, at conservatories. Performer, they learn the performance aspects that define, let's say, Middle Eastern, or to be specific, maybe Near Eastern style of playing on the oud, on the violin, on the nai, on the percussion, voice, qanun, and other instruments. So this was the purpose of the retreat. And now you look at many cities in the United States, you see not only education composers, you see also ensembles that were created because of the retreat. And we have ensembles, I think, in New York, in Jersey, in DC, in Chicago, in Detroit, you name it, in Los Angeles. Many retreats gather and they create ensembles. And this is one of the most powerful segment of the retreat. Create all this action around the Arabic music retreat all over the United States, and then bring it to the audiences of that environment. And this is the purpose of the retreat.
Thank you. And to continue on this, I know that we have to start looking at the questions in the Q&A section, which we'll get
By
to.
the way, Wanees, since mentioning the retreat, this year it's going to be, unfortunately, one more time, online retreat.
Okay.
And it's going to be in August 6 to 9, 4 days of retreat online. And those who are interested to know about the retreat or register, they can contact the Arabic Music Retreat, www.arabicmusicretreat.org. And of course, the retreat has the administrative director, Kay Campbell, who really another big force in the retreat, who takes care of all the administrational work in the retreat. And we have a fantastic faculty this year from Lebanon, from the United States, from from Egypt. So it's going to be interesting, another online experience. But I can promise now that 2022, it will go back to Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts, and it's going to be a retreat on the ground.
And by the way, for those of you who are curious about this retreat, we're going to include a link in the email that you receive tomorrow for the retreat, so you will be able to check it out and see the website and get in touch. So my last question, and then we'll look at the questions on the Q&A board. So now that there are so many practitioners of Arab music and performers and composers, some of whom have made important musical and academic contributions in the past couple of decades. The concept of the cultural ambassador has become more fluid because there are so many now, and at the same time, a lot of us are wondering, where do we go from here? What's the how do we build on the tradition? How do we add to it so that it's also present in the 21st century? How do you see the future? How do you see this tradition in the future beyond?
Yeah, this is a great question, Wanees. It's like any tradition in the world. Tradition, it's not like frozen heritage. It has to be like dynamic heritage, dynamic tradition that always on the move. because you look at certain tradition, and if you want to live the 1904 music tradition in Cairo, then you can live there and and you get stuck there. But the question is, what is what in 1904 in Cairo, musically speaking, means to the next generations, right? And at this point, I believe that Arab traditional music is so deep, it's so powerful, it's so rich, but and we hardly, touch the surface of it. It's time for research. It's time for documentation. It's time for putting all this music in notation in correct way. It's time also to write, all this virtuosity that you see and technical abilities on the oud, on the violin, the Arabic style, to create a kind curriculum for it that reflects on the performer. If I perform in the oud and I have a style and certain technique and ability, then it has to be documented and available to oud players, to musicians, if they want to, of course, choose to do it. So there's a lot of work. And of course, the tradition, I always use the tradition as my springboard, because without the springboard, you cannot really go anywhere. Okay? And then open my horizons and improve with it, and expand with it, if you will, right? And like now, for example, I'm doing a vocal suite. For the first time, I'm composing something that is vocal.
I was going to ask you about this, so I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yes. So I'm doing this vocal suite for big chorus and orchestra and soloist. So what I'm doing here, the suite is not something that I created now. It has been there in Egypt, in Turkey, in Syria, in North Africa for the last many hundred years. But what I'm doing now here, I am selective, and I'm choosing a poetry that speaks to our time, speaks to our causes. Okay? And the poet I selected was Samih Al-Qasim, a very well-known Palestinian poet. I got some segments from his poetry, the late part of his poetry, poem writing, and I put it together, and it's going to be in the form of a suite. So the topic is important. The poetry that speaks to our time is very important. The style of composition, okay, it has to have the instrumental and the vocal, okay, in a way that is very thoughtful, very well documented, and available to any group who wants to do the same thing. So it will be a work that will be available to people in Casablanca, in Cairo, in Damascus, in Ankara, you name it. So this is the work I'm working on now, and I hope that probably in the fall, this fall of 2021, it will be out. It will be
Oh,
out.
very soon. Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
We're going to perform it in Palestine, then perform it in Lebanon, and perform it in the United States, and using performers of the region. It doesn't have to be one group moving from one place to another, but going to Lebanon, using people from Lebanon, musicians, singers, and so forth.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to that. I was going to ask you about vocal music, so I'm glad you brought this one up. I'm going to switch to the Q&A board, and I know that we did answer some of them during our discussion, so I might just kind of be a bit selective because we have about 10 minutes left here. Oh, somebody is asking, do you practice daily, and what exercises do you do?
I used to practice. I was never, a great practitioner in terms of spending time. I remember when I was at Manhattan School of Music doing my master's on the violin performance. I used to practice every day, 1 hour, 1 hour and a half maximum. And then I leave my room on the fifth floor and I look through the windows, the glass window, and my colleagues, my students, they practice 4, 5, 6 hours.
Mm.
I myself, I never had this conviction of practicing so many long because it's impossible to concentrate for 5 hours. But to concentrate for 1 hour with the ultimate concentration and focus, this is a tough asking.
Mm.
And this is what I did. If I practiced 1 hour, it was a full 1 hour. There was no loss of time and focus. Therefore, this is how I practice. This is what I used to do. Now I practice less. Sometimes I do concerts and I do maybe 15 minutes warm up before playing, and everything is in place.
Thank you. This, so I have, um, let's see here. Okay, here's an interesting question. What are the points that you take into consideration when you write a music combining oud and Western orchestra?
Excellent question. Really excellent question. You need to know orchestration. You need to know the instruments, the nature of the instruments, and the sonority of the sound.
Mm.
And it's important to understand that the oud will be lost with the symphonic sound. Okay? So it's very important to understand the how the instrument in symphony orchestra, their sonorities, their projection, their sound, and to use it in a way not to cover the sound of the oud, but to enhance the sound of the oud, if you will, to help the oud come to the front. And this is very, very sensitive issue. I remember when I did my first rehearsal with the Detroit Symphony for this concerto of the oud, C minor concerto. After the first rehearsal, I went back to the hotel and I changed a lot of the dynamics. And we reprinted the parts and gave it to the musicians. And next day we did another rehearsal and it was totally different. So it's important to understand this. And of course, as far as musically speaking, to understand melody, to understand harmony, how it works with the melody, to understand how harmony can interject with some microtonal sounds on the oud without harming the musical idea.
Right.
That's very important. And of course, the use of the Arabic rhythms that could be, very elaborate, like 7 and 9 and 11. Okay, not 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4, like most of the sound. That was another big challenge for the orchestra to feel those rhythms and therefore feel the grouping, the subdivision, and play with the oud, bringing out the beauty of those rhythms.
Right.
So, very challenging, but knowing orchestration, knowing harmony, knowing the sound, knowing sonority, it helps a lot.
Thank you. I'm gonna look for. I'm kind of hunting for these questions, but okay. So that question came from. I'm gonna just mention first names here. Ehab asked that question.
Yeah,
so
hunt for good questions, please. I'm sure they're all great.
They're all great questions. It's very hard to pick from them too. So Michelle is asking, what are your opinions on women playing the oud, and who has impressed you so far and why?
I don't understand what this means. I mean, for me, a oud player is a human being. What this has to do with a woman or a man, or a child or grown. For me, it's a human being. At Berkeley, I had already, let me see, 9 women who studied with me for 4 years on the oud. Uh, they it's a personal thing. It has nothing with comparison. There is nothing to compare there. It is the personal attempt, the personal talent, the personal commitment to the instrument. And again, it's a human being experience. I don't see what this has to do with the child or grown or man or woman.
Mm.
Okay, but for me, they all a human being, and I work with them based on that approach.
What fuels the, oops, they're moving fast here. Let's see.
I just want to go ahead.
Somebody's asking, when is your Taqsim book coming out?
It's not a Taqsim book. It is about the use of the maqam and use of the iqa, the rhythmic mode or the metric mode in Arab music, and the understanding of ornamentation. And it could be, the application could be in pieces of music, and it could be in improvisational settings. Okay, so the improvisation will be part of clarifying this. I'm working this, I have been working on it for the last 2 years. It will take probably another 1 year to, it's a lot of, writing and editing and reviewing, going back and forth. It's not an easy job, but I think if I want to do a good job, it's going to take a little time. I don't believe in creating this kind of studies in few months. It's going to take 3 years at least.
Mm.
So I hope that by the end of 22, beginning of 23, we will have these studies available with the recordings, of course.
Wonderful. Okay, this is a question from actually a friend of mine. His name is Aboud, and he's a wonderful oud player, by the way. He's asking, what are the tensions between notation and encouraging personal creativity of the performer? How much direction should the notation of the Arabic music give?
Meaning, I'm not sure if I understand the question. Meaning that if you look at the notation, are you playing the notation, or they are just the skeleton, and you build upon what you're playing with your own understanding and knowledge of ornamentation and improvisation? Maybe.
I think that's the essence of it. Yeah,
I think so. Both are great. I like when something is documented and it has all the specifics that the composers wants. Why not, right? It's fantastic. But at the same time, I like the idea, of course, of creating a leading sheet that has the musical idea, but then there is a room for the one performer or an ensemble performing together to interpret this and bring their own understanding of the style and perform it together. But this requires awareness, understanding of the styles, have the musical ability to do so. And both are fantastic.
Let's see, I'm picking out here something that's is the traditional way. This is a good question, actually, that I wanted to ask you too. Is there a line? Here's the question. This is from Annette. Is the traditional way of teaching Arab music from teacher to student? And is it okay? Let's see if I can rephrase it better. In Indian music, let's say Carnatic music, the traditional way of teaching happens between a student and a teacher, kind of a master-apprentice relationship. Is that the same way with Arabic music?
I mean, we have to be specific about what this same way means. I don't understand the question. I
I
can
guess,
interpret it, but I don't understand it.
yeah, I
So
guess.
I don't want to create an interpretation.
Hmm.
But I think this is she or he?
It's, I want to say a she.
She, human being.
Mhm.
Uh, I would say the traditional way of teaching Arabic music, it depends on the period, the area, the settings, the masters that you connect with. I remember my father when he used to teach Arabic music. Students used to come to our house, okay, and they learn with my father in his house, and sometimes where they share a meal with us. Some students who came from far away, they would stay with us overnight. And it was a living experience, if you will, not only just play the notes, and it was a living experience. Uh, so this is one way of teaching. Another way of teaching is just to do it like in conservatory style, where student teacher relationship, once a week, twice a week, 1 hour lesson, 2 hours, whatever it is, and have curriculum and to build on, and to where the students, they learn every week for many weeks, many months, hopefully for many years, in order to improve their understanding of music, their musicality, and their performance skill on the instrument. So this is also another way to teach. So I think the first style of teaching, I think it's not very much in practice anymore.
Anymore.
You will find it in some pockets here and there, especially in the Arab countries, but it's not available very much.
Sounds great. I'm going to take one last question here. Somebody's asking, are the Arab, well, I guess broadly, do different Arab regions have different types of ornamentations and style?
Yeah, I mean, this is why in the beginning, if you notice, I said I prefer to use Egyptian music,
Mhm.
Syrian music, Algerian music,
Right.
right? I hope the person who is asking this question listened to my statement in the beginning. Because yes, there are differences. Okay, there are many commonalities between, let's say, Egyptian style and Syrian styles or Iraqi style, but at the same time, there are many differences. Okay, and you don't want to put this in lump sum and say this is Arabic music. No, this is
Right.
not correct. The same way I don't like to say Western classical music, putting all these countries and regions in one lump sum and say this is Western classical music. This doesn't exist, and it's incorrect. You have German music, it's totally different from Italian music. In the 17th century, use a period, right? You have to
Right.
use a period and define the geographics. So yeah, there are differences, but there are many commonalities. There are many commonalities with Turkish music. Okay, Turkish music is not Egyptian music, but also there are commonalities. Okay, and differences.
And
Not only musically speaking, but also the understanding of the maqam.
mhm.
Okay, the perception of the maqam, the perception of a pitch. Okay, I don't want to go deep into this, but yeah, this is very important to understand. And yes, there are differences in all what I mentioned, including ornaments.
Absolutely. And I just actually, I was scrolling to find the question. They did ask about differences in ornamentation and intervals. So thank you for bringing that up. So yes, the answer is there are many differences in how the pitches are approached, how the ornamentation is approached, the styles. You know, this is a vast area, from North Africa all the way to Asia, and Turkish music is different. So yes, there are important differences in these different repertoires. So I think with that, we've covered some good grounds here with the questions. Again, thank you so much for having us, the World Music Institute, Gabby and Brian and Kate. It's been an honor speaking with you and having this conversation. And I'll hand it off to
Yes.
Gabby.
Yes. Thank you both so much. Wanees, Simon, what a fascinating conversation. And Simon, very, very heartfelt thank you as well for your kind words about World Music Institute and your history with us. It's so appreciated, and we're so glad that you're part of the family. And we cannot wait to have you live on stage here in New York City. And we want to thank all of you for joining us. You will receive the recording of this great conversation in tomorrow's emails. We thank you for being here. We thank you for your interest in all of these beautiful, beautiful traditions and from around the world. And we hope we'll see you again at another WMI Plus at home. And thank you again, Wanees. Thank you, Simon. I really appreciate your time and what you have shared with us here tonight.
Thank you, Gabby and Brian. And I'm very happy to see that the World Music Institute with you, Gabby and Brian and the rest, is continuing to do miracles. And this is an amazing attempt.
Thank you. And thanks, everybody, and have a good rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you are. We really are glad that you have joined us and made some time to be with us. Thanks. Goodbye.